the more efficient animals, the animals that were able to raise a calf every year, the animals that were growing faster, that were maintaining body condition, were the animals that were losing less nitrogen in the urine. They were able to recycle more the nitrogen to make more bacterial protein and to really extract more nutrients from the environment.
Welcome to the Beef Podcast. I am one of your hosts, Brandy Buzzard, and it's my pleasure to bring you the trending issues and topics with the best and brightest minds in the beef industry. Today we are joined by Dr. Luis Prada y Silva. Dr. Prada y Silva earned his PhD from Michigan State University in animal science, focusing on mammary gland physiology, and his postdoc at the University of Sao Paulo. He is currently an associate professor at the University of Queensland, and he is joining us very, very early this morning from across the ocean. So we're very appreciative that he has time to join us today. I'm really looking forward to talking with him. So please welcome to the show, Dr. Prada y Silva.
Hi, Brandy. Hi, everyone.
Thank you for being here with us today. And again, I know I said this off air, but thank you for overcoming the time change challenges to be with us during the show. I surely do appreciate that. To start off with, I know I touched on your involvement in the beef industry in your career at a very small amount, but would you be able to bring us up to speed on your career path, your path from Michigan State to the University of Queensland? Those are not locations that are near each other. So just bring us up on your work and your career in the beef industry, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. So for those who don't know, the University of Queensland is in Australia, and the University of Sao Paulo is in Brazil. So yeah, I did cross the globe. So my background is a bit diverse. So I grew up in a typical coffee and dairy farm on the mountains of Brazil. But the farm was a small place, and it was just less than 1 hour from a city with 1 million people. So I was always between these two worlds of all the excitement and the education that we were getting on the big city, and the tranquility and the lack of TV and just the family around the table at the farm. So that was really fascinating to me, these two worlds. And so I went to do my agricultural degree at the University of Sao Paulo, which is a fantastic place to study because it's very broad. You have a lot of freedom to choose your own subjects, which is very unique in Brazil. But for people like me, that I was very lost what I want to do with my life. So for people like me, it was really good because it allowed you to find your way through university. Mm-hmm. So for those of you who feel like you don't know if we're born to do something, don't despair. I wasn't sure what I want to do with my life for a long time. Mm-hmm. I didn't concentrate on cattle production during my university degree. I was very broad. I did business. I did crop physiology. I did soil science, forage production. But then I went for a master's degree with dairy nutrition, just coming back to my family farm. And that's when I started to specialize a bit more on ruminant nutrition. Went for a PhD in the United States. This was in 1998, and Brazil really had only 3 or 4 PhD programs in animal science, and nowadays there are more than 60 or 70.
Oh, wow.
So there was a massive explosion in the whole university system in Brazil. But on those days, you really had very few options to do a PhD in the country. Yeah, I went to study dairy nutrition at Michigan State University. It was fantastic. We were there for 4.5 years. Very different climate, but I learned a lot about animal physiology at Michigan State and animal nutrition. Went back to Brazil, transitioned into beef genetics for a postdoc. Yeah. And then I was hired by the University of Sao Paulo as a researcher and a lecturer at the vet school. So I was teaching forage production and beef cattle nutrition to the vet students for 13 years.
Wow.
Which was really interesting. These were very smart kids. It's the top one vet school in Brazil. As you know, we were working with the brightest minds, but not all of them was really interested in forage production and the beef cattle system. But Then I came for a sabbatical in Melbourne, and I wanted to study gene editing of forages. I want to make low lignin, high energy plants. And with this explosion of biotechnology and gene editing, CRISPR, Cas9, all these new tools that you can play God and change the genome of.
That's a great soundbite.
Yeah, and I knew very little about that, so I thought it was a very good subject for a sabbatical. And by the way, sabbatical is the wonderful invention of humankind, in my opinion, because you keep your salary, but you can do whatever you want for 1 year, just to refresh your brain, apparently. So my first option was going into the Nobel Foundation in Oklahoma, which I heard a lot about, but really my wife said, I'm not going there. What's your second option? It became Melbourne, Australia. So we came to Melbourne. We had a wonderful time, both professionally and for the family. My kids were transitioning to the teenage years at that time. So we had but that was my mistake. We had such a wonderful year, or 8 months in Melbourne, that when we went back to Brazil, the family was like, "Oh, why are we here again, Dad? Why can't we, live somewhere else?" That was nice. Yeah, but anyway, no, we decided to make it work in Brazil. We bought 2 new cars. We painted the house. We replaced all the furniture. Said, now this is gonna work. 6 months later, I was back in Australia for this new job. I got an invitation to work for the University of Queensland. They had a position open for beef cattle nutrition. And Dennis Poppy, who is a researcher, he's now recently retired, but he went to Brazil for a conference, and we went for dinner. And he told me about this position, and he said he thought I should apply. And here I am. We've been living here for 7 years now, and I'm doing most research. I do a bit of teaching, but not a lot. And now my focus is understanding very low input and harsh climate beef production and how to make this system a bit more efficient.
That is that's a great story that your kids were like, hey, can we we want to go back. That's great. I also the poor state of Oklahoma, your wife just really shot that down very quickly.
Yeah, sorry about that, Oklahoma. I've never been there, so I don't know.
Oh, I think that's great. That's funny. I think that you hit the nail on the head very, very squarely when you talked about like the low input, harsh climate of Australia and raising cattle, because, here in the United States, it's very hands-on management and pretty intense intense. And from the bit of time that I spent in Australia, it is really not that way, particularly when you go, north into Queensland and beyond. So I'm glad that we're going to get to talk about that, because that's a very different side of the beef industry from a global standpoint than a lot of people learn about. We talked about this in your bio briefly, and now you're at the University of Queensland. But when I was reading more about your work, you had shared that there's a test that came from your years of research at the university dealing with nitrogen efficiency. And so could you explain to our audience what that is? I know that you've worked on that a lot. You said you're primarily involved with research and not so much teaching anymore. So if you just want to share more with us about that.
Yeah. So when I arrived here, I was traveling around. I convinced my director that there was no point for me staying in the office. I should travel. I should see the country, see the producers and talk to them, interact with the extension agents. So I was doing a lot of traveling, and it's very dry, very hot. The paddocks are huge, like a typical farm in Queensland will have 40,000 hectares and maybe 2,000 or 1,800 cows. This will be run by a couple, very little help. And they usually have a second farm about the same size in a different environment, so they can move cattle around when it's really dry or really wet. So I was very intrigued of how good the body condition of the cows were. Mm-hmm. So that instantly brought me back to what's going on with the nitrogen metabolism of these animals. They are surviving in an environment with 4% protein, 6% protein during the transition period. So these are very tough forage, very dry, low levels of supplement, if any, and these animals are doing fine. So I started studying more about the nitrogen recycling and the way the animals preserve nitrogen and preserve water in the body. And I realized that we don't know a lot about low protein diets. We define requirements as something we should achieve. And when we try to formulate the diets and to manage our system in a way that we achieve those targets, we're really not really good at predicting what's going to happen when we don't. You know, how much are we going to lose of production? Are the animals going to adapt to these low levels or not? So I started working with that, and we had a project we called the nitrogen recycling project, because that's exactly what we were studying. And then it became apparently from our work that the more efficient animals, the animals that were able to raise a calf every year, the animals that were growing faster, that were maintaining body condition, were the animals that were losing less nitrogen in the urine. They were able to recycle more the nitrogen to make more bacterial protein and to really extract more nutrients from the environment.
Yeah.
Right? You know, that's a fantastic thing that cattle can do, and they can do that much better than other animals. They can recycle 80 or 90% of the nitrogen, and we cannot do that. But the system is not very efficient, because we tend to feed a lot of protein to animals that are really good at dealing with low protein. So the nitrogen use efficiency of the cattle production system is below 20%, but we work with animals that can go as high as 80%. So we learned that there was a big variation in the performance of the herd, as anyone who ever worked with beef cattle production notice when you are in the yards, that you always have the top animals that they outperforming the others. You have the bottom animals that are lagging behind. You have cows that are able to give you a calf every year, regardless of the situation. So there's always a very huge range of performance in the herd. And we were able to associate that with the way the animals were able to recycle nitrogen and preserve that. So that opened another door that, if what is making an animal being more efficient is that this animal is losing less nitrogen in the urine, well, wait a minute, I have a way to detect that using nitrogen isotopes in body tissue. So that brings us to another story, Brandy, that I went to a conference in Ireland in 2007, and when you apply for money from the Brazilian government to attend to conference, you need to justify why you want to go there. So I did some research on people that were working at the University of Dublin.
Right.
And I found Frank Monahan, who was doing a bit of work in cattle. So I went to read his work, and he was doing isotope work, and he was using stable isotopes to identify if the beef you're eating is coming from a grass-fed system or for a grain-fed system, because that's important. In Ireland, they wanna preserve the grass-fed system that they have, and they want to differentiate the meat from other meat products that, I can detect in the meat or in the hoof of the animal if this animal ever ate grain in its life. Because of the isotopes. We use the isotopes a lot for wine and honey to detect where it came from. It gives a unique signature on the product. So I went there, and then I got the money. I went to the conference, and I went to visit Frank and have a chat, and he told me about his work. And then Frank actually went to Brazil a couple of times for conference, and his work actually became really well known in Brazil.
Right.
So when I was here now, 13 years later, working in Queensland, I saw this situation, and my work led me to try to detect this nitrogen efficiency. Yeah, so I remember this isotope story, and with cattle is interesting. You have nitrogen 14, which is the normal isotope, but you have a nitrogen 15, which is heavier, and it's stable. It's never going to decay. But for some reason, the nitrogen that you lose in the urine, it's only nitrogen 14.
Oh, okay.
So the body tissue, the cattle tissue, any protein, the beef, the blood is enriched in nitrogen 15. So there you go. If you're losing just one type of the isotope in the urine, and what I want to detect is the proportion of nitrogen that is being lost in the urine, I can measure the ratio between nitrogen 14 and nitrogen 15 in any tissue, but tail hair is a good reservoir of historical data.
Right.
And I can see the animals that will lose more urine because they will lose more nitrogen 14 and change the ratio. So we've been working on that. We're able to use the tail hair, classify the animals, and predict if the animals how fast they will grow, how well they will respond to a protein supplement. The cows that are more fertile, we are able to see that with the isotopes as well. And we actually recently worked with 500 animals to determine the heritability of this trait. And we found out was pretty high, was 43%.
Oh.
It's interesting, but all of this is only applicable when the animals are not with excess protein in the diet, because as soon as they have excess protein in the diet, their ability to recycle, their ability to preserve nitrogen becomes meaningless for the efficiency.
Right. So that's fascinating. So you were able to determine, create the test based on the isotope discussion that you had with the instructor, the researcher from Ireland.
Yes, exactly.
What a full circle kind of, stars aligning type moment. That's very cool. So is that a test that's available? Like if a cattle producer in Queensland wants to do that, is that a test that's available on the commercial market now, or is it still like in the research phase where they have to come to you as part of a research trial to do that, or kind of what's the stage of that and its implementation?
We actually hired a consultancy company to do a business case and talk to the industry independently from the university, because we saw a lot of demand from the industry for this type of test, especially from the study breeders, the people that sell bulls and they sell genetics. They want to know if the animals are more efficient and if the animals are able to perform in tough conditions. So we did this analysis, and the industry is really interested in this sort of test. But the industry, as you could imagine, is not very willing to pay a lot of money for a test like this.
I can see that. I can understand that. Yeah. Especially
if you already pay for to do the DNA analysis and to get the genomic breeding values for animals, which is something that is quickly developing here in Australia, is to use more of the genomic breeding values to collect the tail hair, to get the DNA analyzed, genotyped, and get the genetic potential of the animals through that. So the conclusion of this inquiry for the industry was that, this is all useful. You want to have that, but it would be excellent if this was part of the DNA test. Mm-hmm. What we're doing now is we determine the heritability to see if it would be possible to find the DNA markers associated with this trait. Mm-hmm. And now that we saw that the heritability is good, we are trying to find a little bit more money to do a genotyping on thousands of animals that we already have phenotyped for the nitrogen efficiency and for other traits. So we're with that, we could potentially be able to find the DNA markers, and then it would be just another step in the GBV analysis that the beef cattle producers are already doing.
So it's just that, it will become a tool eventually when it's, incorporated into the DNA test that will allow producers to identify which of their cattle are going to be most feed efficient and survive in these harsher climates without losing feed.
Yeah, and you can do that as soon as the animal is born. So that's the advantage.
Oh yeah.
You don't have to test the progeny of the animal. You can just, well, not when the animal is born, because it needs to be after weaning, and it needs to be eating a diet that is not very high in protein, so you're able to express the trait. But if you turn that into a DNA test, then yeah, it can be done as soon as the animal is born.
So that's really interesting because, I mean, obviously in a nation, kind of everywhere where cattle are raised, feed efficiency is very important. And I can imagine it's even more important in a climate where, there's not as much water availability or forage availability. That's a big component of ranching here. What I know that you've done some work in like supplementation and feed efficiency and things like that. Do you care to kind of explain that, like your work in that area and kind of what implications that has had for producers in the, in Australia, or particularly that Queensland, Victoria area?
Yeah, sure. So we're talking about this physiological mechanism that makes animals be more efficient when protein is low. So if you're trying to define feed efficiency in harsh environments, you will reach the conclusion that it's about nitrogen. But if you're trying to work with feed efficiency in high quality feedlot diets, then efficiency will be defined in a different way. It could be that the animals that are more efficient are the animals that have a lower energy requirement, or they have different microbes in the room and they're able to digest the forage, the diet a bit better. So there could be many different reasons why animals are more efficient. And the environment and the diet will change the definition of efficiency. So that's something we should be aware of. And the other thing that can make an animal be more efficient is the ability of the animal to select the grains in the diet. So we just need to be aware about how we define efficiency. So when I arrived here, the Beef Cattle Association, the breed associations here, they want to test the animals for feed efficiency. But the genetics is being used in the rangelands on this tough environment. And the way the breed association wanted to test the animals was doing the normal performance test on a very high quality feedlot diet.
Oh, okay.
And test for feed efficiency and select the bulls and the genetics for that. And that didn't look like a good idea to me because, how do you know that this genetic that is performing better on this very high quality diet will perform well on the rangelands?
Right. Yeah. Very different settings for cattle to be in.
So we did a couple of studies to show that that's not going to work, that the animals that are more efficient on these high quality diets are not the same animals that are more efficient in low quality diets. And the physiological mechanism regulating efficiency is very different. So I just think that we should not overgeneralize the conclusions that we read in papers that sometimes were done in a different environment for a different purpose, and we assume that's going to work everywhere.
Well, that makes sense to me. Cattle outcomes from research in Montana are not going to affect cattle the same way as outcomes from research in Florida. And so I imagine that's exactly what you're getting at, is that this high protein concentrated diet in a feedlot is not the same as running cattle in northern Queensland and things like that. I have never been to the Northern Territory, but I have been to northern Queensland, and yeah, they're very different. And so I can see why, that research was vitally important to provide that background, that we can't just use the same measuring stick for all cattle.
It's really hard to measure feed efficiency and the physiological mechanism controlling that. If you're trying to measure efficiency in low protein, low quality diets, then the animals are not growing fast enough. So your precision to evaluate growth is diminished. So it's not an easy exercise. And there's a lot of interest to use sensors to be able to detect efficiency in grazing animals. So there's this is an open area of research. I see there's a lot of activity in this area here in Australia. Is trying to use different technologies to try to monitor the grazing behavior or the actual chewing mechanism of the animals to try to come up with a number evaluating grazing intake. Mm-hmm. So we've been trying to do that for decades, but perhaps with some new technology, we will be able to get something that is suitable.
You know, like at the end of every scientific paper, it says it's like always more research is always needed on this topic to further, you know, solidify results and things. And I think that's just always going to be something that we deal with in all areas of animal science, is that like we just keep inching closer to solutions, and we find a solution and that uncovers another problem or thing that we want to investigate. So it's just been interesting to hear how, you know, you went down this path of these different feed efficiencies and things like that. In the United States, at the time of this recording right now, we're kind of wrapping up calving season for a lot of our producers. It's early April, and I honestly don't know when a lot of people in Australia calve. However, I know that you have done a lot of work on calf survival and how that relates to heavier calves and healthier cows and things like that. And so I am particularly interested in that because I am also a cow-calf producer. So what can you tell us about your research on calf survival and how that leads to heavier calves and healthier cows?
Yeah, sure. This is the South Hemisphere, so it's the inverse from the United States. The calving season will be, you know, the end of spring as well, beginning of summer, but that will be October, November, December for us. In October, November, December in Australia, in Queensland, where the cow-calf operations are in the Northern Territory, it's extremely dry and hot. The break of the season, the first storms, they only happen in January. Well, usually the climate in Australia is highly variable, so you never know, but usually the rain, if the rain comes, it will come definitely after Christmas. Mm-hmm. So this is past peak calving. So that means that the cows here, they are going through the last trimester of gestation and the transition period during the worst part of the year, where you are finishing the dry season. There is very little forage left. What is left is low quality. It's really hot. The cows need to walk 2 or 3 kilometers to get to the water trough. Mm. So it's really a difficult situation.
Right.
And calf mortality here in Australia, measured from pregnancy testing to weaning, is about 13 or 14%. So it's pretty high.
Okay.
Some regions can be as high as 20%. Okay, so with time with the tail hair and the nitrogen metabolism, I work with a commercial property where I evaluate a big number of animals. Cows that were, even in these conditions, were able to deliver calves every year compared to cows that were skipping every other year. Mm-hmm. And we're able to see big differences on the nitrogen metabolism, on these nitrogen isotopes. Mm-hmm. So we decided to test the idea, okay, what if we do a short-term supplementation of these animals during peak calving, during the end of gestation, to try to improve milk delivery. There was a previous project done called the cash cow. Was trying to investigate why the problem was happening, and the main conclusions were that poor nutrition, environmental stress were the main cause of calf mortality. Mm-hmm. And probably because there was a delay in milk delivery, in colostrum delivery to these newborn calves. The calves were born, they had nothing to drink for a few hours. When it's very hot, they will become dehydrated and die.
Oh, yeah.
Or they will not get enough colostrum, they will become sick and die.
Right.
So we thought about, can we improve this situation by using protein supplements? So we did 2 studies, and we saw wonderful results with that. In a sense that the calves were drinking more milk. Even for if you supplement the cows for 3 or 4 weeks, that's enough to increase milk delivery and the growth of the calves.
Okay.
And the transfer of immunoglobulins to the calves as well.
Okay.
And we collect blood from the cows every other day during the prepartum phase, and we were able to detect changes in the progesterone, the hormone progesterone concentration in the blood.
Mm-hmm.
So progesterone needs to go down for milk production to start. It's really a strong inhibitor of the enzymes that are necessary to secrete milk.
Okay.
When you have a extreme situation, a poor protein, very low levels of nutrients, we saw a delay in the progesterone decline, and we think that's related to this delay in milk delivery. We had enough data to support a large grant. So now we have a project called Calf Alive.
Oh, okay.
And we're working with 12 commercial properties around Queensland and the Northern Territory to implement a better nutrition program, a short-term one, and to be able to monitor the impacts on fertility, on calf survival and growth, and the overall productivity of the herd.
So I have a question, and it's been a really long time since I had any type of advanced repro physiology class, so you have to forgive me because I'm a little off. But so the progesterone and your oxytocin would be in like direct contrast there. I believe, is the supplementation, is the progesterone being suppressed, or is the oxytocin being increased? Like, are both happening at the same time? Like,
yeah.
Or is it just affecting one of them, and an outcome of that is that the other one reacts?
Yeah. So progesterone is very high during pregnancy, right? That will be stable and high during pregnancy. And when the fetus is starting to produce a lot of cortisol, it's time to be born. Then the cells secreting progesterone will start to degrade. The corpus luteum will start to disappear, and your source of progesterone will disappear. So you need to have luteolysis for this to happen. And this is started by the timing of calving and the stress hormones produced by the calf. So we think what's happening is that this process of luteolysis is being delayed because of a lack of protein, amino acids, and hormones in the blood.
Okay.
There's a bit of uncertainty if the corpus luteum is the only source of progesterone in cattle or not. We know that in sheep, the placenta is a good source of progesterone as well. Mm-hmm. There's a bit unknown how important is the placenta in cattle from the literature that I was able to read. But we think, so you're right that you also have the estrogen and the oxytocin and all these lactogenic hormones increasing at the same time. But it could be very, very well be that this extra supplement is increasing estrogen secretion as well. But we didn't monitor any of those hormones. We're only able to monitor progesterone. That's easier to analyze. Mm-hmm. But it could very well be that there are changes on the lactogenic hormones as well, especially estrogen.
Well, thank you for clarifying. Like I said, it's been about 13 years since it's been 12 years since I finished my master's, and it was more than that since I actually did the coursework. So thank you for clarifying for me. I appreciate that. My master's is not in reproductive physiology, and that definitely shows. So, but that's very interesting. I find it very interesting to think about the problems and challenges that are associated based simply on climate and geographic location. Like, we're all, beef producers, ranchers, farmers, we're all raising some type of bovine, but like the environment has such a monumental impact on the way we do that and on the animals. And I find that I don't think I'll ever find that non-interesting.
It's time for our famous three.
We have reached the point of our podcast where I ask the same three questions of every guest. And so I gave you a heads up on these. In the past, I would not give a guest a heads up, and I don't think they like that very much. So I gave you a heads up. And so the first one is, what is your favorite beef or cattle related book or resource? I mentioned we've had people say a lot of various things. I think my favorite answer, honestly, so far has been that one guest said that his wife is his favorite beef cattle resource because she manages the cattle side and the genetics, and he manages the business aspect. So, but that's the question: is your favorite beef or cattle related book or resource?
Look, that's a very important question. So I'm just going to prolong a little bit my answer here because I'm really worried about the quality of information that is out there.
Okay.
And I really feel for young people and students that they don't know the environment well. So it's really too hard to judge if that is a good source of information or not.
Okay.
So that's something that I'm really concerned with, is that we are losing the ability to put a quality stamp on information so that we know if that is a trustworthy source of information or not. We're basically being able to publish anything without any standards, and that is accessible for people. So
that's a very valid point. I had not thought about that at all, that there's no guidelines for publishing advice or...
No, everything is accessible. Everything, you can write anything you want. You find a place that will publish, and that will be available to everyone.
Yeah.
And so
I hadn't thought about that.
I think it becoming more and more by knowing the people, knowing the source of the information. Okay, where is that coming from? Can I trust that group? Can I trust that source? So it's becoming harder to determine that. And so I encourage the young listeners to don't trust everything you read, and try to find out who the good people are. Talk to your professors, to the people that have more experience to get your information, because it can be really misleading. So I have, in Australia, the Extension Service has an excellent website that's called Future Beef.
Oh, okay.
And you find a lot of good and practical information there. So it helped me a lot when I first arrived in Australia to learn more about the system. You have that extension flavor on the publication. It's not pure scientifically. You have the language and the application of the information. So that was really helpful to me.
Mm-hmm.
For my classes and for my study, the Van Soest book on ruminant nutrition and physiology is a great source of information still.
Well, that's great. I really like the forewarning about different resources. That I've never had anybody do that, but I did appreciate that, because you're right. There's no standards for publishing information about things. So many things are self-published these days. And so I'm glad you pointed that out.
Just to complement, the name of the book is Nutritional Ecology of the Ruminant. That's the Peter J. Van Soest book.
Okay, great. All right, so the next one is, what is a book that is not related to the beef industry that you are currently reading or is one of your favorites?
Yeah, I love the human social science books and literature. I found it fascinating, the research people do to understand us humans and why do we behave the way we behave. So I believe it was last week we lost Daniel Kahneman, who won the Nobel Prize in Economy, but he's actually a psychologist, very famous one. And he wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow.
Okay.
Where he described his life work, where they basically describe these two systems that we use to make decisions. One that is like our gut feeling, and they won the Nobel Prize because they were able to show that people buy stocks and they behave in a very weird way following these two systems. So I'm reading this book now after his death last week. I decided to reread the book, and it's really fascinating. It's helping a lot to understand our unconscious bias as well. we judge people all the time based on looks and language and the color of skin and that kind of thing. And this work and the way our brain tends to simplify things and is eager to classify everything, people, situations, cattle, the way we make decisions when we work is really fascinating when you read about that.
That's interesting. I have not had that one before. There's a couple books that people have mentioned that we've had, like there's a Dale Carnegie book that has been mentioned a few times, but I had never heard of that one, Thinking Fast and Slow. So I also put that in the show notes if people would like to look that up and examine it for themselves. Okay, so our last kind of rapid fire question is, when you think of someone that you admire or look up to, what is a trait they possess that has enabled them to be successful?
I see that all the time on my colleagues and students as well. Sometimes you have a class and most people would just sit there, but there's always one or two that are asking all the questions and they really want to know everything.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the trait that differentiates people, is people that have this curiosity and this inquisitive mind. With graduate students, some students will give a protocol and the student just wants to finish that. And then it doesn't work. And well, I don't know why it didn't work. But the good ones, they want to understand each step. They want to know, okay, why am I adding this 10% buffer here? Why this is happening? Why that is happening? I think that's what makes science.
Yeah.
Yeah, the people that I admire and I've seen that are people that they like what they do, of course, but they like what they do because they like to learn and they always asking questions. They always wanted to know more.
I agree with that. That reminds me of have you seen or ever watched Ted Lasso, that show about soccer? And
yeah, I know about the show. Sorry, Brand, I haven't watched it.
It's okay. There's a key line in there where he talks about being like, stay curious, be curious. And so that's a good reminder to ask questions. And that is the basis of science, is being curious. So I love that you shared that with us today.
Exactly.
Well, Dr. Prada y Silva, that is all the questions I have for you today. Thank you very much for sharing about your research and your career and the things that excite you and that you look forward to in the coming years. I really appreciate your time. If people would like to learn more about your research or get in touch with you or, follow you online or something, do you have anywhere that you'd like to send them, to a website or a social media profile? This is your chance basically to kind of like make that plug if you would like.
You can reach me with my email, my phone number. This is all available at the university website. So if you just Google Luis Prada y Silva, University of Queensland, you'll find me.
Okay.
And then, I'll be glad to chat and discuss anything about beef cattle production.
Okay. Well, again, thank you very much for joining us today. I appreciate you with the early hour joining us. I know that is not easy, but your time is valuable, and we thank you for being on the show with us. To our audience, thank you for joining us wherever you may be and for tuning in. And we hope that you'll join us next week on the Beef Podcast.